We are not only moving from Cedar Fair to Six Flags today, but also moving outside of the Buckeye State for the first time. Yes, it is time for a park that has been thrilling riders since 1976, just outside the city of Chicago in the suburb of Gurnee, Illinois. Chicago's skyline may be iconic, but the 15 roller coasters of this park make a pretty solid skyline in their own right. Yes, it's time to talk about Six Flags Great America, which is today's topic on the Coaster Broadcast Podcast. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Coaster Broadcast Podcast, the podcast that not only gets you excited for your next trip, but gives you nostalgic memories of what makes these parks great for travelers and thrill seekers alike. I am your host, Sedric Granger, and I'm hyped to talk about one of my favorite amusement park trips from the summer of 2023. Park trips are not only special because of the thrilling coasters, but also because of the people you get to meet or connect with. Well, in my personal experience, I feel the park trip that I had that really embodied this idea the most is my trip to Six Flags Great America. Today's episode, we will take a listen to sounds from the park. We'll go listen to a little bit of those vlog clips that I have from that special day I had at the Illinois-based theme park. And of course, discuss some of the top coasters. And then of course, we'll finish it all off with having a special interview from an official member of the American Coaster Enthusiast who is near and dear to Six Flags Great America. So to begin this broadcast, let's immerse you in the sounds of the park. There is nothing like the sensory experiences of an amusement park. I mean, from the many happy voices chattering around the midway, the bells and whistles of people playing midway games, the smell of all the delicious food from the fried funnel cakes to the barbecue to the delicious grilled items. The roller coasters, of course, roaring on the track is a great sound. I mean, you just have so many amazing sounds. Speaking of roller coasters, though, it is time for the segment where we break down 5 notable coasters from the park. And that means it is time for our High 5 segment. The High 5 segment is themed to the rare roller coaster element known as a high five, where racing or dueling coasters bank towards each other, creating the appearance of the two sides high-fiving. Well, I find it fitting because I was high-fiving the people I was riding the roller coasters with after riding the amazing and underrated coaster collection of Six Flags Great America. Of the 15 great options, it was really tough to limit to just 5 amazing coasters. But the best part about this is that this collection has so many solid rides that everyone, including all of you, can have different ones that resonate with you. However, there were a couple that stood out to me, either for the ride experience, the history, the fun memories, or the color scheme and presentation. So with that said, let's get started with the high 5, and let's begin with one of the most iconic coasters at Six Flags Great America. Ride of the day, it is the Raging Bull, the tallest roller coaster at Six Flags Great America. And I always love when rides at amusement parks have some sort of reference to a sports team in the area. And of course, this one references the Chicago Bulls. Of course, they were powerhouses all throughout the 90s, and it's great to see a roller coaster that was built in the 90s be able to reference that. It's Raging Bull, the B&M Hyper, coming up next. And that was Raging Bull at Six Flags Great America, the B&M Hypercoaster. I love my B&Ms. I love hypercoasters. And compared to the ones at Kings Island, those ones have seat belts. This one does not have seat belts because life doesn't give you seat belts. And it was a great ride for that. You can go check out all the orange track flying everywhere. It's a twister layout, and it had some great airtime on the drop. It was very unique. It is one of my favorite B&M hypers. I put it probably right behind Diamondback and in front of Intimidator. What a great way to start off our High Five segment of the Coaster Broadcast Podcast with one of the roller coasters that makes a strong presence. It is Raging Bull, the B&M Hyper roller coaster. First of all, let's start with the base stats. It's a steel sit-down coaster by Bollinger and Mabillard, a company that you should get to know by listening to this broadcast because, hey, you're going to hear the name Bollinger and Mabillard, also known as B&M, quite often throughout not only this rankings, but also in future episodes. But Raging Bull, it's a hyper coaster with orange track and maroon support, stands at 202 feet tall and 208 feet in terms of its drop. The reason the drop is taller than the height itself is because it goes into an underground tunnel at a speed of 73 miles per hour. It's a nice long ride too, lasting 2 minutes and 30 seconds along over 5,000 feet of steel track. And this ride, it's now celebrating its 25th year of operation here in 2024, as it's been operating since May 1st, 1999. So we're very close to its birthday. Actually, by the time this episode releases, it should be past its 25th birthday. So happy birthday, Raging Bull, giving rides to people for a very, very long time. Actually, more time than I've been alive for. I was born in 2001. But we mentioned the part about it being a hyper roller coaster. If you don't know, a hyper roller coaster is any roller coaster that either has a height of 200 feet or has a drop of 200 or more feet, between 200 and 299, and height 200 to 299 feet. And generally put, it is a marketing gimmick that was made and coined by amusement parks to be able to advertise their rides better, just like how nowadays there's a hyper coaster. Then you also have giga coasters, which are 300 to 399 feet, so rides like, Millennium Force at Cedar Point Orion, at Kings Island, Fury 325 at Carowinds, or Intimidator 305 at King's Dominion. Those are some examples of giga coasters. Then you also have strata coasters, which are between 400 and 499 feet, such as Top Thrill Dragster, and then also King Dakar, the world's tallest roller coaster, over at Six Flags Great Adventure. So ultimately, it is a bit of a marketing gimmick in that way. Before we jump into some of the topics around Raging Bull, let's jump into the ride experience first. Really enjoyed getting to go up to the sign. It has a really cool entrance sign design where you have an angry bull kind of breaking through the wood with the sign. And you kind of have a sort of Mexican-inspired theme. You kind of think of like the Matadors, if you think about that sort of theming. It kind of has that sort of Southwestern, that Mexican, the Alamo Mission type of vibe that's going on with the station, which I think is really cool, kind of fits you into the theme, gets you into that kind of desert mentality. And it's very similar to what they do in other parts of the Six Flags chain. If you think about a prominent roller coaster in El Toro, which we'll talk a little bit more about that coaster too as well when we talk about intimate wooden coasters with one of the others in our top 5, hint, hint. I think it's something that is really interesting and really puts you into the theme. And then furthermore, of course, the Bulls theme, as I mentioned in the vlog clip, it has a lot of references to the Chicago Bulls. And the trains themselves, they rock the Chicago Bulls color scheme in black and red, even though the train and the track itself, or the track I should say, is orange track with maroon supports. You still have that Chicago Bulls reference, especially with the train black and red. And I mean, they're the most popular sports team in the city. Because you think about some of the other sports, Chicago's split in baseball with the White Sox and the Cubs. Chicago's split in that sport at least. But football, I mean, it's mainly the Bears, but there are also a lot of other teams around, such as the Green Bay Packers that are really close by. But in basketball, your main team, and it's far and away the main team, is the Chicago Bulls, especially with how many championships, the 6 championships they won in the 90s. I mean, it's insane what the Bulls were able to do. Ultimate dynasty in sports and one of the greatest basketball players of all time. So it is really a slam dunk, so to speak, to name your roller coaster off of that. But getting into the trains, you get into the clamshell style restraints. I was shocked that there was not seat belts, because in Cedar Fair, all their B&M coasters need seat belts. This one, it doesn't need a seat belt for Raging Bull. It just had the clamshell restraint, which is one of the most comfortable restraints there is. It makes you feel very loose, very free. You take a slight turn out of the station and then up into the big lift hill. It's a nice slow lift hill, so it gets to give you the chance to take your time. You can look to the left, look to the right, see the parking lot, see the other roller coasters, see the highway, see a bunch of different things around, which I think is really cool. So I really love that aspect of the park in that way. When it comes to building lift hills, you got to be very intentional about how you make that so that you can get a really good view at the top, and Raging Bull doesn't disappoint. You didn't go into a drop, but not just straight into the drop. You do a pre-drop after the lift hill, so it gives you some initial speed where it takes, instead of going down all the way on its height, so you're 202 feet in the air, the drop is totally 208 feet, but you do a little like 4-foot drop or a 5-foot dip. As soon as you get off the chain lift, it allows you to build some speed, gain some airtime, and then you get into your main drop as well, which is one of the best parts of the roller coaster. I love the first drop. You go whipping into that tunnel, and then you come out doing a little overbank turn. One more airtime hill, which is probably your best airtime moment aside from the pre-drop section. And then you got a couple of great twister elements. You get into a mid-course brake run, an airtime hill or two, but mostly it's about those bank turns and feeling the speed as you rage around the orange track like you're a Raging Bull. So the ride experience, I think, is fantastic on this one. And in the big picture of things, it was the first B&M Hypercoaster alongside Apollo's Chariot, which is at Busch Gardens, Williamsburg in Virginia. And I think it's one of the most significant models in the coaster industry. It's something that is a crowd pleaser. It can have the elite heights that you want, where you can maybe intimidate people and get people like, oh gosh, I'm a little bit afraid to ride this, but I can do it. I can do it. The B&M Hypercoaster has become that sort of model because it's really smooth. It's very graceful. It's not too intense, yet the height tends to be pretty crazy. So it's a really great balance in that way. I feel like it's a ride where even though it is over 200 feet, you could take your whole family on it and you could really enjoy this ride. Raging Bull and Apollo's Chariot, they set the tone too for a model that's still being made and is very successful to this day for B&M. There's of course been quite a bit of changes. If you look at some of the other B&M coasters, you think Diamondback, Kings Island, that's one I know very well. That was my first B&M Hyper. And then I also got to ride the newest B&M Hyper coaster, or at least now second newest B&M Hyper coaster in America since Candemonium has just come out, but Mako at SeaWorld in Florida. And there's definitely been some big additions. You haven't seen a layout quite like Raging Bull in a long time, as it seems like B&M's really decided to go all in on the Apollo's Chariot style B&M Hyper, which is more about the airtime hills as opposed to the twister layout like Raging Bull. The airtime is what seems to be the most popular. But it's nice that Raging Bull and Apollo's Chariot, those two rides, got to be the examples and set the tone of what a B&M Hyper coaster should be, and Raging Bull certainly doesn't disappoint. Now with that said, let's jump into our next one in the high five. Millennium Force, how about Max Force? Yeah, we're getting ready to go on Max Force, one of the coolest coasters here at the park. This thing launches you 0 to 78 in about 1.8 seconds right there. It's got some speed. Let's see what this one's all about. Look at that thing go. That was Max Force in the front row. Unbelievable ride. Launch, speed, everything you can want. Just know this, coaster fans, if a coaster has the word force in it, it's probably a great ride. If you got a need for speed, this is the ride for you. Yes, it is Max Force. With its white track, black supports, the S&S Steel Launch Coaster goes from 0 to 78 in just 1.8 seconds. That's some real speed right there. It opened in 2019, so it's one of the newer roller coasters here at Six Flags Great America, and it's something that is really cool because we'll talk about how it represents the new wave that the industry has really adopted that we've been seeing at amusement parks all throughout the world. But it stands at 175 feet tall, and it's just a 23-second ride, so it's a short one, but it sure does pack a punch. When it comes to the elements, there's some really interesting names here. First, you launch into something called a dog tongue element, which, you know, that's an element that when you look at it from a certain angle, looks like the tongue of a dog. It's pretty self-explanatory in that way, and it's kind of a funky feeling when you're on the ride going through that element. Then you go into a very low heartline roll, which is basically just spinning alongside the heart line. So think of your heart. Let's say you put a line right throughout it, like if you were to have a stake through a vampire's heart, for example. Sorry to be a little gruesome with that reference, but you kind of spin around that axis. The train makes sure to keep your heart right in that middle around that axis. It's kind of like that. So kind of like a inline twist or just a barrel roll. Those are the best ways to compare it. And then you have something called a max dive loop, which is another really cool element. Let's take you into the ride experience. This one not as well themed, especially compared to some of the other rides at the park. But what it does have is it gets you excited because as you're moving up towards the station, and the theming I just described mainly as modern, you have a nice little sign and everything, and then just your normal cattle pen queue. But when you go up to the station, you get a chance to see that launch. You get to see the energy in the station. They play a lot of nice, loud, energetic music to really get the energy going. And then seeing these riders launch, feeling the adrenaline as they wait on the launch track, ready to go from 0 to 78 like a bullet getting shot out of a gun. There's nothing like it. There really is nothing like that. It has such a unique and fun experience. And S&S, they've really been in their bag lately with their roller coaster designs, and the launch, to be able to launch with that much acceleration, that much kickback, oh my gosh, it's nothing like it. Great experience in many, many ways. It also represents the new wave of the industry. A lot of the roller coasters that are being built now feature launches instead of the traditional chain lifts. Think about it. If you are a indoor theme park or you have a height restriction or you don't want to have to worry about the chain lift being reliable, you could just use a launch. Use the launch. You can get up to the speed that you want to get up to, and you can provide the energy to go through any element that your heart desires. So I think it's really cool that launches have become the new wave, and Max Force, very representative of that when it comes to Six Flags. I think this one, though, was the ride that really resonated with me so much when I went over to Six Flags. The person I got to go with, Ron, which you'll get to hear a little bit more from him later in this show. I met him just the day of going to the park, and he took me on this ride alongside his friend Gary as well. And these guys, they talked all about the ride, and it really lived up to what they put up. The expectations they set for me, it definitely exceeded them. Max Force, great roller coaster. Now let's move on to another great roller coaster here at Six Flags Great America. Time for a ride that when it opened, it was the tallest wooden roller coaster in the world at 184 feet. It is Goliath. RMC goodness, a wooden topper track roller coaster, and excited to give it a try. I heard it's probably the best at the park, either this or the B&M Hyper over there, Raging Bull, which we'll be getting to very soon as well, as we try to marathon this park in less than an hour so that we can go and avoid as many lines as possible before a park gets busy. We're doing pretty well. We're keeping up a good pace. Let's see if we can keep up this tempo. Time for the RMC, it's Goliath. Every Six Flags park has a Goliath, and this one's Goliath is an RMC, and it's really good. So it's time to check it out. When it opened, it was the tallest wooden coaster in the world. So let's see if it fits up to the billing. That was Goliath. If you like airtime hills, this one's got a whole bunch of them, including one that is upside down. Check that out. Perfect time in Goliath, as that ride was pretty good. Not bad for a 90th roller coaster. Yep, that's a milestone. Here comes the ride that was probably my most anticipated roller coaster of the bunch at Six Flags Great America. And it's got to be Goliath, which, of course, it's one out of the 7 different roller coasters in the world that are named Goliath. Six Flags loves to clone their names, and that'll be a big topic of what we talk about in this section of the High Five. But Goliath, let's start with the base stats. It opened in 2014. 165 feet tall, a 180-foot drop, 72 mile per hour top speed. And when we go to the elements, you got a nice variety of elements. Despite it being a pretty quick ride, only about a minute and some change, it does pack in quite a few elements. First, the 85-degree drop. You got the tunnel. You got the overbanked curves, airtime hills, a dive loop, which is one of the only ones of its kind on a looping roller, or on a wooden roller coaster, I should say. You got a 0G stall, which is like an upside down airtime hill, which is nuts. And then, of course, with it being an RMC wooden coaster, you have the brown wooden coaster track. You also have a little bit of dark orange in the mix for the coloration of this roller coaster. When it opened up, it was actually the tallest wooden roller coaster, I should say, in the world when it came out. So it's pretty nice to see it had some excellent accolades when it came out. When it comes to ride experience, they do a good job theming this one up a little bit. So instead of just having a generic theme, it does have a generic name just because of how many teams and how many, I should say, roller coasters use the name Goliath and how many rides use the name Goliath, especially in the Six Flags chain. It's nice that they really went with a theme. They tried to make it like kind of Roman and Greek inspired, so they had a lot of those columns. They made it kind of like a centurion or like a hero that you'd see like in the Percy Jackson series, whether that's the Olympians, which are the first 5 books, or maybe the Roman series of books that they did afterwards. It just gives you a good vibe, though. It gives you like, hey, this is an ancient civilization. We got warriors, and it just is an extra mile that Six Flags took to theme up the ride, which I thought was really great. Just adds more to the presentation. And then the roller coaster itself, you go up the lift hill. It's one of those lift hills that I think looks absolutely gorgeous. They have a truss wood that's over there. So instead of having what's like most wooden coasters, you have the whole wooden structure that goes all the way down. This one just has like probably about a 10 feet by 10 foot truss that's underneath the roller coaster track as it goes up. And then there's just one major support that goes through. So it makes it one of the best looking lift hills. It's basically like a wooden version of the Intimidator 305 lift hill, which I think is just so aesthetically pleasing. It looks amazing. And when I went, it was a gorgeous, clear day. So I got a lot of great video of that lift hill. You also can see the ride very well from this place where I had ice cream with the people that I went with. So it's really nice, or people that I ended up hanging out with throughout the day, which was awesome to get to enjoy some ice cream and be able to observe the roller coaster while the sun was setting. Speaking of the ride elements, airtime, fantastic. RMC, which is right here, of course, in the United States, Rocky Mountain Construction, they have risen to being one of the top in the industry, and it's for good reason. RMC does not disappoint. Their airtime, their profiling, the smoothness, it's just unmatched, and they did a great job with this one. I love how they decided to be unique by throwing in that check that dive loop, which the dive loop, it's a element where you rise up, you go upside down, and then you drop the same way that you came in. And it's just a really cool element. You see it on steel coasters quite a bit. You see it on coasters like wing coasters or inverts, but nobody thought to do it on a wooden coaster, so it's very innovative to see that on the ride. Now, going back to that idea, Six Flags, they like to duplicate names. When it comes to Goliath, 1 out of 7 coasters named Goliath. There's also a B&M invert named Goliath. You have a Vekoma giant inverted boomerang at Six Flags New England that's named Goliath. You have one coaster at Wallaby Holland, which is named Goliath. It used to be a Six Flags park, but now it's on its own with a different brand overseas. So it still kept its name, though, and it didn't have to change the name. So it's still called Goliath. That's an Intamin mega coaster. So there's many, many types of Goliath. You have one that's a Guy Vanola hyper coaster, which I've ridden that one at Six Flags Magic Mountain. So it's a very popular name. It's cheaper for Six Flags. They save a lot of money, especially because most people who aren't roller coaster enthusiasts don't really travel to more than 1 or 2 regional amusement parks. Most of the time, they just go to the local park. So one Goliath to them is a different Goliath experience to somebody else, which I always find pretty funny. But speaking of cloned rides and duplicated names, let's go into another ride that really stood out to me at Six Flags Great America. it's time for the first ride of the day. And all I can say about this one is it's a bird, it's a plane, no, it's a roller coaster. Yeah, it's Superman flying roller coaster. We're gonna be headed there first to get a ride on that, as a lot of people are running towards that one, as there'll be a lot of other rides here. I mean, we got 17 roller coasters. My coaster count's at 86, so I just need 14 to 100. So here we go. Superman Ultimate Flight. That ride was pretty darn intense. The main thing that gets you is that pretzel loop. That was my first ever pretzel loop, and man, does that pull some G-force. Other than that though, it's just like being like Superman flying through the air. And if there was any superpower that I could choose, it would be to fly. Now I'm gonna fly my way over to the next coaster of the day. Stay tuned. Man of Steel himself approves. As I mentioned in the vlog so excitingly, what is that in the air? Is it a bird? It's a plane? No, it's a roller coaster. Yes, Superman Ultimate Flight, the B&M flying roller coaster with red track and yellow trim with blue supports, having a color scheme that reflects, of course, the Man of Steel himself. You have a B&M flying coaster, like I mentioned, same company that built Raging Bull that we talked about earlier in the show. But this one opened 4 years after Raging Bull in 2003. Superman Ultimate Flight features a 106-foot height, a 100-foot swooping drop at a 51-mile-per-hour top speed. You also have a 3-minute duration with a pretzel loop, an inline twist element, as well as some overbank turns and many elements that accentuate the feeling of flying like the Man of Steel. So this was the first roller coaster that I went to. I heard that this one is one of the more popular rides at the park because it's right there at the front of the park. Plus, you have the recognizability of the name Superman. When people think of a superhero like your Batman or your Superman, those are some of the most popular superheroes. So people naturally are going to want to ride those roller coasters. And that one being right in front of the front entrance, you just move to your left and you're there at Superman Ultimate Flight. It also is a ride that greets you when you come into the parking lot of Six Flags Great America. At least turn at the traffic light that's right next to the parking lot. It's really cool to be able to see that one and get to have a chance to ride. You go underneath this big facade that has Superman flying pretty high over the top. You go in, which the line was already starting to stack up immediately when I got to the park. But they had a lot of different cutouts of like Superman, Supergirl, Lex Luthor, all the other Superman villains and heroes and sidekicks and everything like that. So it was cool to, go through that in the line, read those up, because the line does move a little bit slow. It is a difficult boarding process when it comes to B&M flying coasters because it's such an innovative concept. It started with Air, which is a roller coaster at Alton Towers overseas in England, and that roller coaster is now named Galactica. They switched names and themes for that, but it's such a cool concept, and it is something that when people are asked what superpower would you want, a lot of people would say flight, and now you get to do that on this roller coaster. So you get into your seat, you start off normal, like a normal seating thing where you sit right side up, and then the roller coaster train, once everyone's locked in, it moves up so that you're in the flying position. It's pretty comfortable. It is a little bit awkward, but it is overall really comfortable. And then you go out of the station, you do a little S-bend, and then you go up the lift hill. And my goodness, it's so cool looking down. It makes you feel like you're so high up in the air because in the flying position, your face is pretty much straight down and you can see how high up off the ground you are as you look at the green grass below you that starts to get smaller and smaller as you climb up that lift hill. Then you do a nice swooping drop and into something called a pretzel loop. And my goodness, it is one of the most intense roller coaster elements I've ever ridden. The rest of the ride, fairly graceful, but this is the one where you're going to want to brace yourself because the positive G-force at the bottom of that one, unbelievable. After that, you do a couple of other swooping elements. You do one inline twist near the end, which is pretty cool because you go from looking down at the ground to looking up at the sky to looking back down at the ground in a quick twist motion, which I think is really cool. So Superman Ultimate Flight, it was the first flying coaster that I rode, or at least just say first B&M flying coaster. I've done Firehawk at Kings Island when it was around, but it is the first B&M flyer that I did, and I think it's such an impressive and cool concept, Superman Ultimate Flight is. So much so, though, that Six Flags, they probably thought the same thing, and they decided to clone the ride. So the ride is really designed for Six Flags Over Georgia, which is just outside of Atlanta. and it's really built for the terrain that was in that Atlanta park. Now you compare that to the park that is in Illinois outside of Chicago in the city of Gurnee. The terrain's a little bit different, so it feels like you're much higher above the terrain than you are at over Georgia. That ride is a little bit closer to the terrain. So that's one of the negative aspects of cloning a roller coaster, because although it's cheaper, it feels like the roller coaster wasn't designed necessarily for the land. It was just designed that can be put, as long as you put it up high enough, it can be on any plot of land. And Six Flags, I know it saves a lot of money, but they did that same thing with, of course, Superman Ultimate Flight at Six Flags Great Adventure, which is in New Jersey. You also have Batman the Ride, which didn't put that in the high five, but it certainly could have been, as it was the first B&M invert, especially the Six Flags Great America one was the first B&M invert. So there's definitely some talking points there, but I'll hit on that later when we get into the honorable mention section. But overall, I think Six Flags and Superman Ultimate Flight, I think it's a great roller coaster. It's a good clone ride example, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And this is a concept that works at so many parks. It gets great ridership. It's something that really represents the theme. Naming it Superman Ultimate Flight is so fitting because it's a flying roller coaster. What does Superman do? He flies through the sky, and you get to be like Superman on this ride. And I think that's the strongest point to Superman Ultimate Flight. Plus, using the license to your advantage is something you got to do when you have that DC theming if you're Six Flags. So that was American Eagle. This one is an oldie but a goodie. This one has been around for a long time, opened as the tallest racing roller coaster, according to Gary and Ron. And this one is very nice. Kind of reminds me of the racer at Kings Island, just a little bit of a bigger scale. And it has some elements of the Beast to it as well, where it has a nice helix at the end that makes a roar just like the Beast does at Kings Island. Awesome, awesome ride. Now to close things off, we go to American Eagle, the USA themed ride. And I think it's really cool because it is called Six Flags Great America, but you don't necessarily get the themed reference so much. There are times in areas of the park where it kind of feels like that Americana sort of vibe, especially with the carousel that you get at the grand entrance to the park. And there are also many different homages to that. But I think this roller coaster is one of the cool examples of showcasing that Americana theme. So let's jump into the base stats. This roller coaster came out in 1981. It's an Intamin wooden racing roller coaster painted white with red and blue trim. And with it being a racing coaster, I find it pretty interesting. They don't always race the sides all the time like they used to, but it's one of the coolest roller coaster models because it kind of builds a little bit of rivalry up with your friends. So when you're going with your party to this, I mean, it's just really cool to be able to be like, hey, I'm taking red, you take blue, and we'll see which side wins, and the winner gets bragging rights for the whole day. I think it's really cool having that as the ride experience, but everything about it, pretty classic. It's very much a picture of its time. It takes you back essentially to the 1980s, kind of an older style classic station. You get into the trains designed by PTC, which is the Philadelphia Toboggan Company, but the roller coaster itself is actually an Intamin roller coaster, which I find interesting. You go up the nice tall lift hill, about 165 feet up, and you get to enjoy some of the sights from around the area. It's in the back of the park, so you get to look to your right and see the entirety of the park as you're going up through the lift hill. But you don't have too much time to take that all in, because before you know it, you'll be going over the drop, and you get some really great airtime moments on the way through. It feels very classic, a little rough around the edges, but when I went on it, it was running fairly well. And overall, I think the coolest part is that turnaround. They have a really interesting turnaround section where it's a giant helix. So instead of having just a normal curved turnaround where you go up a hill, you go around a 180-degree turn, and then you go back the other direction, you do a full helix, which I think is a really cool way of turning things around. And then before you know it, you're back to the station. So Intamin, they're more well known for their steel roller coasters, but their wooden coaster designs aren't too shabby as well. They have really come a long way, and they use the prefabricated technique nowadays to ensure exact measurements to improve smoothness and profiling. And I'm looking at El Toro, which is a roller coaster at Six Flags Great Adventure that uses that prefabrication. But now with the American Eagle back in the past, they had to use all their calculations by hand. So, there are sometimes imperfections, but it adds a little bit of character to the ride. And I think that as a result, I think it does make it super popular with a lot of people who visit Six Flags Great America. I know that Ron and Gary, they really loved how great this roller coaster was, and they loved the history behind it, and also like growing up having ridden that, especially since, of course, in Gary's case, from Kenosha, Ron from also around the area. So these are roller coasters that people grow up with and got to create a lot of great memories too. And now with it being open since 1981, we're talking over 40 years, you're having generations where people might have rode them when they were teenagers and now got a chance to ride the roller coaster with their kids, that same one. I think about getting to ride the Viper roller coaster with my mom. It was one of her favorites growing up back at Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California. And then I got to ride it with her when I was a kid, when I was about 9 or 10 years old. So that's the joy of seeing some of these roller coasters operate for such a long time. So that's why I wanted to make sure to give American Eagle a shout out on the high five. Here were a couple of honorable mentions that fell just short of making the high five, but I think are definitely notable. Viper, this is a roller coaster that was the most underrated roller coaster at Six Flags Great America, in my opinion. Then you also have the Whizzer. Whizzer is something that was originally going to be taken out of the park, but people and fans, they spoke and they made sure that the Whizzer stayed. So I got to give credit to the fans of Six Flags Great America for protesting to keep their coaster operating. Then you got the X-Flight. This is a B&M wing coaster, kind of like a mini version of the Gatekeeper. This one is awesome, and we might hear a little bit more about X-Flight later, hint, hint. Then we got the Joker, as well as Batman the Ride. Two other examples similar to Superman Ultimate Flight of Six Flags cashing in on the DC theming. I think that's a brilliant move. These are recognizable characters, and it helps to create popularity among the general public because these are people that people know. And when you have that, you have fans who are fans of DC might really want to go and ride these rides to see all the theming and the nods to the rides, but also the color scheme and just the overall vibe of the ride can reflect how the superhero and villain respectively are. Also, one last thing about Batman the Ride, it was the first B&M inverted roller coaster, so it was the first of its kind opening in the early 1990s. All right, I am here with two of my new friends that I met. We got Gary over here, we got Ron. I've gotten to go to Six Flags Great America for the first time in my life. These guys have been going for years upon years and been showing me the ropes. I'm glad to have met them. They are great friends of mine and hope to be able to see them again at other park visits.
You know it.
So for our next segment of the Coaster Broadcast Podcast, it's time for a special interview with Ron Witzak. He's not only an official member of the American Coaster Enthusiast, but he also is a huge fan of Six Flags Great America. So much so that he has built friendships with some of the previous ownership groups of the park. Meeting Ron was a special thing during my visit as he gave me a full tour of the park, amazing stories behind each attraction, and helped me to make the most of my day in every way. So with that said, let's jump into our exclusive interview with Ron. All right, Ron, thank you for joining me here on the Coaster Broadcast Podcast, which is the name of the podcast, by the way, which I'm really excited about that name too. But just tell me a little bit about your background with Six Flags Great America. It seems like you have so many great memories with the park.
Well, this may be hard to believe for a lot of people, but I have been going to Six Flags Great America ever since it was Marriott's Great America on the opening Wednesday of 1976.
Wow, 1976. And I'm sure you've seen the park change in a lot of ways. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen over time?
You know, surprisingly, the park has maintained most of its, authenticity that Marriott brought in. The one section being the DC section. But other than that, the park really is the same in terms of the lands and everything. Probably the biggest change, obviously, when Six Flags came in, not the same area didn't do it, but when Six Flags came in, they brought many, many rides here because they knew that this park needed to compete against, the other Midwestern parks.
Yeah, some serious competition in the area too. I know, of course, from a Midwest perspective, it's the big one in Chicago, but there are also parks, obviously, in St. Louis and Ohio, Minnesota, and other places to compete with. But what, in your opinion, makes Six Flags Great America stand out above the rest?
You know, what I totally believe is the collection of overall rides that we have here, and especially roller coasters. Some of my best friends have said so many people underestimate the lineup of coasters that are at Great America. And, when I stop and think about it, it's very true. I mean, we've had a lot of firsts, the first stand-up, the first inverted, first wing coaster, the first hyper coaster, along with Carlos Chariot, obviously. But really, it's the whole collection of rides. I mean, there's something for everyone at the park.
Yeah, I mean, that's the vibe that I got as well when I went to the park myself, getting to see how great this lineup was, where you have your classic B&M lineup where you get yourself a hyper, you get an inverted, you got a flyer. It seems like you have every B&M model under the sun. You pair that with a great RMC roller coaster, and then, of course, Max Force, which was absolutely special. And, that was our favorite when we were over there. It was just a ton of fun getting to be on all the different roller coasters. I know, too, that you have a really good connection with some of the people in the ownership groups of Six Flags. I remember you telling me stories. Would you care to talk a little bit more about that?
Oh, sure. Not the current CEO, but a couple CEOs back, his name was Harold T. Hudson. And not only was he the CEO of Six Flags, but he also was a engineer. So he chose Great America to be the testing ground, and that's how we got Iron Wolf as the first stand-up B&M roller coaster. He gave B&M their chance at Great America with Iron Wolf. Then he followed that up with Batman the Ride. And I'll tell you, so many people were skeptical and thought that an outside looping roller coaster would pull itself apart. And look how many of those we have now. They're everywhere. And then brought us the hyper coaster, and it's interesting because he deliberately made Raging Bull a hyper twister, which a lot of enthusiasts they're a little turned off by that until they realize that it's not like every other hyper coaster out and back. It's literally a hyper twister. It's very different in many ways. Then he went out and hired, the man's name was Thelmus. I can't remember what his first name was. And he designed in-house, Six Flags designed in-house, the roller coaster Viper. We are the only Six Flags park that can say we've had an in-house wooden roller coaster designed from the ground up. Let's see, what else did he do? I mean, just many, many things. He totally loved Great America. Back in the day, it was pretty funny. He read an article about us being some friends from Wisconsin and myself, and us going down to Kings Island to ride the Vortex. And at that time, the corporate headquarters for Six Flags was right outside of O'Hare. And he contacted all of us and wanted to know why were we passing up, especially the people from Wisconsin, why were they passing up Great America and going to Kings Island? We told him, well, you got a 6 inverting roller coaster there, and it's pretty incredible and tall. Great America's just got the demon. And this man listened so intently that he said, what if I bring you a bigger, with more inversions Will that make you stay at Great America more? And the very next season, we got Shockwave.
Wow. He really feels like he's a man of the people in many ways, and he's listening to what your guys' input are, especially the people that care about the park the most, and oftentimes are, of course, coaster enthusiasts. And you guys got to really have your input heard with that ownership.
Oh, sure. You know, he even asked me the question with the American Eagle. You rode the American Eagle. I believe you enjoyed it.
I did enjoy it.
It was funny because I don't think a lot of people really realize that Harold was kind of the first guy out of the gate. You call it the RMC work. Well, he RMC'd the American Eagle from the first drop into the Helix, where he made it, using metal on top, the way RMC does with their topper track, but maintaining the wood so that the American Eagle would stay a wooden roller coaster. Because they had so much trouble with the ride pulling itself apart and replacing, over the winter, replacing boards and stuff. And ever since he's done that, that part of the roller coaster has run for years without any issue.
Yeah, without any issue at all. So again, it seems like there's been so many great moves that were made, and it's awesome getting to hear about how you and your friends and the people close to you who are also interested in roller coasters got to play an impact on how the whole current park is, even though I know some of these rides aren't there anymore, like Great American Scream Machine, but there are other rides, or Shockwave rather, sorry, instead of a Six Flags Great Adventure. But with Shockwave and that ride being there and not there anymore, but there still are other rides that still have that legacy that is there as well, which is awesome. But continuing on, Ron, one of the best days of my life was getting to go to the park myself back in May. I came in, having done some research, of course, and I knew a couple of things. I knew which roller coasters I wanted to hit, but I knew there were also going to be some surprises that were there. But having you as like my tour guide through all of it was really awesome. And I just want you to share that experience. I'm sure you've also taken other people to Six Flags Great America for their first time, and you've gotten to introduce them. So what do you always try to emphasize when you're showing people the park for the first time?
I try to emphasize, it's interesting. I think a lot of people underplay Great America, and it's interesting. I'm not exactly sure why, I understand why people love Cedar Point. I understand why people love Kings Island, but you say Great America and people are like, oh yeah, it's Great America. Well, what I try to do is show people that there truly are special things about Great America that makes it stand out from all these other parks. We may not have the biggest, the longest, the tallest roller coasters, but we have some of the most unique ones. When I saw you walking up the entranceway, and I could see that enthusiasm, and you were just so excited for your first ever visit, I said, this is someone I've got to give him a very special visit to the park. And it was certainly my pleasure to do that.
Yeah, I'm never going to forget that day and getting to go on all the different rides, get to tour, and it was just special on many levels. And even getting to meet some of the people that are in management. I recall us having conversations about that, the stories that you had about every single ride that was there. And then I pair that also with some of the stories my stepmom had, for example. She sent me the picture of her growing up in Chicago, taking a picture with Yosemite Sam. So it's cool seeing how all these ties to the parks and how everybody has their own history with these different amusement parks. So for me, like I grew up going to Kings Island very often, so I have a lot of nostalgia for that park, but I also have a lot of recent memories because of graduating during the COVID year in 2020 and Kings Island being one of the few things that was still open. And then you pair that up with different memories I have where, hey, I was in Battle Creek for a summer and closest park was Six Flags Great America. And I'm never going to be closer to Six Flags Great America. At least I haven't been in my life than what I was there. And I'm like, I know I have to drive 3 hours and some change to get there. There's no way I'm going to pass up going to that park again. So again, I just appreciate all those special memories and how you emphasize like, hey, we see the enthusiasm that's there. We're excited for these trips. And you made it a very special day.
Well, thank you. Well, so did you. I could see in your eyes, as we were telling you the stories, and explaining the history of the park. And then you got to experience the ride. And then my favorite thing was watching you get off of every ride and give your critique of the ride. That was just something very magical. I can't express to you what it means to me to see someone else truly enjoy it. No matter where we are, you could do the same thing with me at Kings Island, even though I've been to Kings Island many times too. But you can show me things I don't know. Like I showed you at Great America. And it was so much fun watching your reaction to everything. And they just kept going, and you just, you could see your enthusiasm and your love for this. You had discovered something new. Yeah, that's what I love. And that's what I always try to show people. Everybody's here to have a good time. There's plenty to do. You can plan it all out. Come, enjoy, It's the whole plan.
It is. I mean, that's what a lot of amusement park trips are all about, too, is like for a full day, you don't have to worry about anything that's going on in the outside. You get to experience something. You get to fly free and get to see things that you've only seen before in YouTube videos. Like to see the amusement park, and you grow up, you go on the road. And I used to watch, especially with my dad, and we would watch all these POVs of different roller coasters around the country. And I'd be like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to go on Raging Bull one day? Wouldn't it be cool to go on Superman Ultimate Flight? This coaster looks so cool. Max Force, it looks like it's coming out. And I'm showing my friends in my 8th grade class or 9th grade class or whatever. And now you get to ride and see that coaster in person. Like, that's something that's so special and never gets old for me, ever.
Oh, Max Force is, it's 23 seconds of pure adrenaline. It's just amazing.
Yep, especially front row, back row, both of those hit different.
Yep, that's very true.
It is. Last thing I want to ask you about, Ron, is just describe to me your favorite roller coaster at Six Flags Great America. Maybe Max Force some more, but I'd love to just hear you sound off on that a little bit more.
Well, here's what I'm going to say. Max Force is definitely up there, but I've got to say, my favorite roller coaster at Great America is X-Flight. The B&M wing coaster is, how can you describe it other than it's so much fun being on either side of the track, and the near misses are just, it's such a thrill, you got the head choppers, the late choppers, and then you go through the airport hangar, and then you do that long inline twist. And it's funny because there's an optical illusion because they're so big that wing coasters are slow, but they're not slow.
No, they
not
move.
Slow at all.
They move. I mean, I think that's a really fun one to be able to share because a lot of people would usually say Goliath or Max Force or maybe Raging Bull in their top 3. But I love the pick because everybody's got to have a personal favorite that's there too, especially when you're going to the park so often. There's ones that might surprise you and might it's like how Viper was something I did not anticipate being as good as it was when I went to Six Flags Great America. I was almost in shock when getting off of that. And X-Flight, I mean, I love B&M wing coasters myself. Of course, Gatekeeper being in my neck of the woods is one of my all-time favorites, and it's aesthetically pleasing as well. And X-Flight, it captures that same energy for me because I'm such a big fan of flight. I love airports. I love the airplane theme, and X-Flight really captures that with the hangar bay, the near miss elements. It's just such a cool ride. It's in a nice compact area. So I really love that selection, Ron. I think that's a good choice.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I agree.
All right. I appreciate your time. One of the best parts about being a roller coaster fan and an amusement park fan as a whole is getting to meet other roller coaster enthusiasts and just meet other people who are local to the park. I think about when other people come to visit Kings Island from out of state, especially since I know that park so well. I love being able to share all the different nuances, the hidden gems, and all those details about the park. Now I kind of got to switch the shoes a little bit and get to come from the perspective of being someone who maybe has researched the park a little bit, but doesn't truly know the park. And Ron, he gave me a great experience that day of getting to know the park, getting to give me a tour, talk to me about some of the special aspects of it, and then help me get the most out of my day, as well as even gifting me a nice t-shirt at the end as well, too. I still have my Six Flags Great America gear on me as well, too. I have a couple of Raging Bull t-shirts that I like to wear on rotation throughout my school days here at college. But it was super fun getting to have that interview with Ron, and of course want to once again say thank you to him for joining us on the Coaster Broadcast Podcast. So that's all we have for today's episode. When we come back for our next episode of the Coaster Broadcast Podcast, be on the lookout for a episode that's going back to Cedar Fair. We went from Cedar Fair to Six Flags, and now we're going back to Cedar Fair for our next episode. So be on the lookout for that. Make sure to follow, of course, Back on Track Coasters. No spaces in between that. BACKONTRACKCOASTERS on Instagram for photos and videos from trips, updates on the podcast, and a ton of other great amusement park related content. But that's all for me. This is Sedric Granger, your host of the Coaster Broadcast Podcast, signing off.